Hi, this is Jeff Kober with Disney Insights. If Disneyland is the happiest place on earth, then Fantasyland is, in Marty Sklar's words, the happiest kingdom of them all. He goes on to say that, quote, "Here in the happiest kingdom of them all, you can journey with Snow White through the dark forest to the diamond mine of the Seven Dwarfs. Flee the clutches of Mr. Smee and Captain Hook with Peter Pan, and race with Mr. Toad on his wild auto ride through the streets of old London town. Dumbo, the elephant with aerodynamic ears, will take you on a flight high above Fantasyland, while the haughty caterpillar of Alice in Wonderland carries you down the rabbit hole into the Tulgey Wood. In colorful Dutch canal boats or the Casey Jr. Circus train, you'll journey through Storybook Land to see the homes of the three little pigs, Pinocchio's village, and Cinderella's castle." End of quote. Join us as we see those inspirational nuggets that are found throughout the sprawling grounds of Fantasyland, from Sleeping Beauty Castle to the majestic and mighty Matterhorn Mountain. We'll check out some fantastic details, few see, and we'll hear stories that you may not have heard before, many of which truly are the inspiration for the joy found at Disneyland. Join us during Disneyland's 70th anniversary for Fantasyland, the happiest kingdom of them all. And stay tuned at the end. I will give you a peek at a new offering available to those who wish upon a star. This podcast is produced by myself and Performance Journeys, which offers training, development, and consultancy support to organizations big and small and entrepreneurs new and established. With a wide variety of resources and long-time in-the-trench experience, we offer workshops, online learning, coaching, and more to organizations that want to build their teams, raise organizational excellence, improve leadership, and simply get better. Hey, check us out at performancejourneys.com. As with our podcast, be sure to check out our website, disneyinsights.com, where we offer key points, photos, videos, links, and so much more. Note that YouTube carries now our podcast, so please subscribe to our Disney Insights YouTube page, as it will be more a part of our social media strategy moving forward. We appreciate any positive ratings, reviews, or referrals you make to others. We thank you in advance. All right, let's get on with Fantasyland. We have gone through all of the different lands of Disneyland over the last year as part of the 70th anniversary. And now we are finally coming to the last of all the lands. And yes, absolutely the best of all of them. It is Fantasyland. And the starting point for Fantasyland is, of course, Sleeping Beauty Castle, which has been the symbol of the park for over 70 years. You can see Disney's family crest as you approach Sleeping Beauty Castle, but imagine Sleeping Beauty Castle is truly the work of Herb Ryman, who drew the original layout that sold ABC on investing in the Disneyland project in the first place. Now that castle is infamous. A couple of years ago, Disneyland was listed as the most Instagrammed location on the planet. Clearly, Sleeping Beauty's castle was at the top of what made it so, perhaps maybe followed by the churro of the day. It's amazing that Walt Disney had the vision to create such an iconic image at the center of the park. Of course, that evolved. When this castle was first designed, it wasn't at the end of Main Street. Rather, it was the focal point on the back side of Fantasyland. Only a wall and drawbridge met you in front. Then Herb Ryman when he did the first complete park map, it was shown in the back. But during development, it was moved to the front of Fantasyland as its entrance. Herb Ryman's drawing a Sleeping Beauty castle based on Neuschwanstein in Europe. For Ryman, it was not just placemaking, but what people do in those places. His best-known piece of advice to beginning Disneyland designers was to make their concept art specifically vague so it captured the soul and emotion but left details for later. By the way, if you look at the rendering Ryman created of the castle, you'll see that the primary tower looks similar to Neuschwanstein, but not like the castle you see today. Fred Jurger had created a model of the castle, and while the model looked great, Herb Ryman didn't like the look of the primary tower. He played with turning the primary tower around to Fred's disapproval, afraid Walt would walk in any moment and see it not quite right. And at that moment, yes, Walt walked in, saw the castle with the primary tower turned around, and thought it was much better. That's how it came to look like what it is today. You can see the variation of the differences when you visit DisneyInsights.com. In recent years, Imagineer Kim Irvine led a badly needed renovation of the original icon of them all, Sleeping Beauty Castle at Disneyland. She turned to the inspiration for the original castle, done by Herb Ryman. She discovered in this, as he put it, specifically vague, artwork, heightened pinks and blues, not unlike Sleeping Beauty's own dress, which changes back and forth from pink to blue thanks to the fairy godmothers. The color choices impressed Kim, and in the remodel, she incorporated more of the pinks and blues. She would also add one other touch. Near Snow White's Wishing Well and Grotto stands nearby to the castle, lies a small walkway leading to Central Plaza. Look for a small pine tree with the label, quote, genus Artispecies Rymanus, end of quote. It's a growing tribute to Herb Ryman. Again, who inspires you? And how do you inspire others? And how can just a twist of thinking inspire you to create something even better? And how do you pay tribute to those who inspire you? There are two Disney characters that from the beginning defined Disneyland, and especially Fantasyland. Those two characters were Tinker Bell and Jiminy Cricket. Both opened the Disneyland TV show. In time, one became the voice whose song When You Wish Upon a Star welcomed you into Sleeping Beauty Castle. The other became famous for flying during nightly fireworks from the top of the mighty Matterhorn, past the castle and into the night. But why these two Disney characters? Marty Sklar wrote in Walt Disney's Disneyland Pictorial Souvenir, "When we were planning Fantasyland, we recalled the lyrics of the song When You Wish Upon a Star. The words of that melody from our picture Pinocchio inspired us to create a land where dreams come true." This is inspirational. However, the real truth was more born out of fear. For some organizations, assets come in the form of investments, product lines, and real estate. In the golden age of Hollywood, your greatest assets were the actors under contract to you. At Disney, its greatest assets are its stars, the characters that it has brought to life through its animated films. Like other projects before it, many felt that Disneyland and the accompanying television show would be Walt's folly. Moreover, it would be an embarrassment to the organization. In the early days of design, construction, and promotion, one of those critics was Walt's brother, Roy. According to Margaret Carey, who modeled for animators Tinker Bell in the original Peter Pan, Roy approached Walt about his skepticism. In short, he didn't want to risk associating their greatest asset, the Disney canon of characters, with the park or with the TV show that would promote the park. To pacify Roy, Walt told him he would narrow the use of characters down to one or two. A few days later, he came back to Roy with two characters, Tinker Bell from Peter Pan and Jiminy Cricket from Pinocchio. Roy agreed. That's why when you see the original Disneyland TV show episodes, you only see Tinkerbell flying in and you only hear Jiminy Cricket singing When You Wish Upon a Star. Of course, not long after, license was given to associate all of the Disney characters with both the park and television operation. But at one time, even Roy Disney was skeptical of associating with what he believed was his brother's folly. It's interesting. How do we think about our greatest investment, our next adventure, our next risk? And how are we using our assets to support that adventure? And do we believe in what we are doing enough to put everything we have on the line? If not, what would it take to do so? We passed through the castle to a beloved opening day ride attraction at Disneyland. It's Peter Pan's Flight. And other than Hong Kong Disneyland, you can find a version of it in every park around the world. In each of these attractions, you find a certain amphibian known as the crocodile. In the film, he even had his own song. Never smile at a crocodile. No, you can't get friendly with a crocodile. Don't be taken in by his welcome grin. He's imagining how well you'd fit within his skin. Never smile at a crocodile. Never dip your hat and stop to talk a while. Never run, walk away, say good night, not good day, clear the aisle, but never smile at Mr. Crocodile. Those were words and music by Jack Lawrence and Frank Churchill. Captain Hook learned this important lesson when he lost his hand to Mr. Crocodile. There are actually lots of crocodiles and alligators throughout Disneyland. In Tiana's Bayou Adventure and the Jungle Cruise. Even It's a Small World, and you could see this image on DisneyInsights.com. Even It's a Small World has a toad that's sitting on top of a gator. It's down below in a shadowy part of the Africa section beneath the other animals of the savannah. But it's there. That image is reminiscent, actually, of a tale told of a frog that lived in the middle of the swamp. The frog hated the swamp and wanted to live on the other side of the river. But crossing the river put him in danger of snakes who would eat him, so he didn't dare cross. One day, he happened upon a crocodile. Immediately, he leaped away. He had been taught not to hang around crocodiles. The crocodile reasoned with him, quote, I can help you cross the river, and I'm glad to do so, as I do not care for those slithery snakes either, end of quote. The frog knew better than to hitch a ride with the crocodile, but he was wanting badly to reach the bank across the river. The crocodile reasoned that he could sit on his tail. So off they went across the river, but the crocodile struggled to swim without the use of his tail underneath the water, so he suggested that the frog get on his back. But once situated there, the frog couldn't see much, so the crocodile reasoned that the view was much better on his head. Indeed, the view was much better, and he could see more clearly the bank ahead. Just then, the crocodile complained of a cattail stuck in his nose. He teared up and pleaded with the frog to check his snout. The frog was anxious to do so, but the bank was very close, and he thought that he really ought to repay the crocodile in some way. Besides, just a little closer to the bank and he could jump. Turning to the snout, the frog could see no cattail. He replied, I don't see. Just then, with a terrific chomp, the frog disappeared. The crocodile smiled and licked his lips in satisfaction. Good, I feel much better already. He smiled and turned around to go back home. Well, yeah, you didn't know there was such a dark tale with a frog sitting on a crocodile. And of all places, It's a Small World. But hey, ask yourself, who are the crocodiles to the success of your organization? And is there someone you want bad enough that you would take risks with those you can't trust? And are there those who do business with you because you see them as a lesser evil than doing business with others you don't trust at all? If so, what are the potential consequences of collaborating with them? Again, it's amazing the details that are within this. No one ever thinks. They look for the Disney characters and the regular dolls and so forth, and it's a small world. But there in the river of Africa, and It's a Small World, there is a frog sitting on a crocodile. We come back through the castle to visit another shop that was actually, well, it was adjacent to Peter Pan's flight for many years, and it was Merlin's Magic Shop. It was a place where magicians worked, to include Steve Martin. But this is not a story about that celebrity. Rather, it's a story about another individual. And that story involves Betty Hutton. At this little shop, there were a wide variety of magic tricks and unusual type gimmicky kinds of souvenirs. And on one occasion, actress Betty Hutton, during the height of her stardom, visited Disneyland. From the moment she arrived, visitors recognized her and asked for autographs. So Miss Hutton decided she would find a way to disguise herself. Heading over to Merlin's Magic Shop in Fantasyland, she purchased long false eyelashes, a buccaneer's hat, and a special sword that went right through her head. According to Marty Sklar, the disguise, well, it had mixed results. No one recognized the famous actress, but guests still turned to her throughout her visit to inquire where they could buy a hat like that crazy one you got on. Now, it begs the question, what is a VIP? Most people would say a very important person. Certainly Betty Hutton would fit that category, but there's another definition of a VIP. You can also consider a VIP to be a very individual person. In Betty Hutton's situation, she simply wanted to be left alone so she could enjoy a day at the park like anyone else. While any of us would enjoy being treated as a very important person, the truth is that most of the time, we want to be treated as a very individual person, reaching out to our unique individual needs. Reaching out to customers to offer such individualized attention is critical to creating service excellence and has been a hallmark for many years at Disneyland. So ask yourself, what are the VIP needs of your customers? And even though your employees may not include Steve Martin, what are the VIP needs of those employees? And how can we provide individualized service to so many that we serve? Let's move on to the Storyland canal boats. In the old days, like 50 years ago, there was a ticket book system that included tickets from A through E, with E being the most popular attractions. Fantasyland is the only place where every one of those 5 different ticket coupon options, A, B, C, D, and E, could be used on some attraction within that land. Most purchased, when they came into the park, a ticket book with a set of either 11 or 15 tickets in each. I assure you, I always had the 15 tickets. And by the way, I had considered very carefully all the way for months prior which attraction I would use for each of those 15 tickets. You'd have 5 for, I believe there was 5 E tickets, and then you had 4 for D, 3 for C, 2 for B, and 1 for A. I think that adds up. Yeah, I think that adds up to 15. But if you didn't have the ticket book, or you wanted even additional tickets, you visited ticket booths that were laid out throughout the park. Each land had a ticket book. Tomorrowland had 2 ticket books, but Fantasyland had 3 ticket booths. Let's review those 16 attractions available 50 years ago and what Fantasyland attraction held to which ticket. Starting with the very simple A tickets, which were basically about 10 cents a ticket to purchase. You had two attractions in Fantasyland. In fact, every ticket had at least two options. And in Fantasyland, it was the King Arthur Carousel right in the center, or it was Sleeping Beauty's Castle, which is a walkthrough experience that takes you up through the castle and tells the story of Sleeping Beauty. For a B ticket, you had three choices, and this is where it got really good, because Alice in Wonderland was one of those B ticket choices. Now, all the other dark rides came under the C category, but Alice in Wonderland was a B ticket, so that was an absolute great choice. There was also the motorboat cruise and Casey Jr.'s circus train. We'll talk about the motorboat cruise in a moment. But at any rate, I've probably used both B tickets on Alice in Wonderland. It was simply one of my favorite attractions. Then you had the C tickets, and that was more difficult because there were lots of options for use in the C ticket to include attractions outside of Fantasyland. But there were only three tickets to go with. You had the Fantasyland Autopia. Again, probably you didn't know that there was such a thing, but I'll talk about that in a minute. You had Dumbo Flying Elephants. You had the Mad Tea Party. Okay, those are all good, but usually I use the three for Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, Peter Pan's Flight, and Snow White's Adventures, which, in parentheses, was noted as being scary. With your D ticket, and you had four of those, you had two Fantasyland choices, and I honestly didn't use them often because there were some other really good choices in other parts of the park. But they included Skyway to Tomorrowland. There was a gondola bucket system that led you from Fantasyland to Tomorrowland, and then you could also, in Tomorrowland, use a D ticket to come back to Fantasyland. And then there was Storybook Land canal boats, which we're going to talk about in just a second. And then finally, you had the E-tickets, which had two great attractions, and I frequently used them for those attractions. It included It's a Small World and the Matterhorn bobsleds. When you had a ticket, what did you do with it? Well, when you came to the attraction, you had to present it to a cast member in order to ride the attraction. Here's a little known secret. When you go to Casey Jr. Circus train and you see that little station, or when you see the oversized mushroom adjacent to Alice in Wonderland, or when you pass by the lighthouse at Storybook Land canal boats, well, these were all former locations where your ticket was taken before you started to queue. And they actually still remain in Disneyland today as just part of the decor. Let's climb aboard the Storybook Land canal boats for a whale of small details. I say that because if you're not familiar with it, the first thing that the boat does is enter the mouth of Monstro the whale. Within this attraction, as you emerge past the whale, are tiny replications of some of your favorite Disney settings, such as Cinderella, Aladdin, and Mr. Toad. It's a kingdom within a kingdom. Originally, this attraction, when it opened in 1955, was just a boat ride. There wasn't anything else to see but perhaps weeds along the bank. It wasn't long before Walt asked his team of artists and craftsmen to build a miniature world for guests to enjoy. This created challenges and costs even for a project that was at such a small scale. In order for electricians to change the light bulbs inside these small homes, 6-inch doors would have to be made of lead hinges because it was not easy because of the scale of the buildings. Everything was 1 inch to 1 foot. Meanwhile, gardeners had to utilize vegetation that looked proportionate to the homes they surrounded. Think of plants where the leaves were only 1/4 to 1/2 inch in length. To this end, they thought to use Japanese bonsai trees, but those tiny trees require constant care, and in that era, they were not very attainable. Near Mendocino, in Northern California, the landscapers literally unearthed a more perfect solution. Dwarfed pine trees were growing in a quote-unquote pygmy forest just feet away from the same species that towers 60 to 80 feet tall. Given a limestone shelf, they would only grow 1 inch per year in their new home at Disneyland. It was during this time one art director proposed that the tiny stained glass windows in Pinocchio's village be made of a lesser material than actually stained glass. After all, the guests can't see it. Walt squelched that by saying, "I can see it." And by the way, look even closer through the window of Geppetto's shop, where you'll see carved dozens of tiny toys. Disneyland is over 150 acres of magic. But it's magical because Walt paid attention to details that were no bigger than an inch or so. To that effect, you have to ask yourself, what are the stained glass windows in our organization? What are the tiny details that we need to pay attention to? And how do we seek to wow those who have been loyal and faithful to our services? Well, speaking of Storybook Land canal boats, let's talk about someone who worked on both this attraction and It's a Small World. And David Koenig's wonderful work called The 55ers, which is about those who were there on opening day, who worked at Disneyland in the opening year of the park. Joe Delphin delivered building supplies to the Golden Horseshoe when it was under construction. Visiting Disneyland while under construction, he was so impressed, he spoke to Ray Miller, who made him a gardener on the spot. One of his first assignments was covering Schweitzer Falls with rockwork with sphagnum moss. He would go on to doing much of the special pruning that was required for Storybook Land. Because of his talent for trimming bushes, he would take to pruning a shrub each year to look like a turkey. In time, he was invited to trim a bush into the shape of an elephant balancing on a wall. Walt learned of this and assigned him for 2 years in creating the animal topiaries found inside of It's a Small World in Fantasyland. Those concept of topiaries were brought over to Walt Disney World, but not for It's a Small World, but for the transportation and ticket entrance to the park. In fact, in the early days, trams would take guests between the TTC and the gates of the Magic Kingdom, along with boats and monorails. Many of these at the beginning were not far enough along that they were spaced far away that the guests could not see the use of artificial foliage. Now today, in fact, actually starting today is the annual Epcot International Garden Flower and Garden event at Epcot. With over 70 topiaries in any event, they are hugely popular with guests. Although the manner in which the plants are used has evolved. Still, all of it had its beginning with Joe Delphin, who was shaping turkeys out of bushes every Thanksgiving. Well, by the way, on the way to Small World, you pass by some interesting areas that really don't have anything going on with them, but in truth, they actually were earlier attractions that belonged to Disneyland, to include the Fantasyland Autopia, the Midget Autopia, and the Motorboat Cruise. Let's talk about what these attractions were all about. With the success of the Tomorrowland Autopia, which opened with the park, it only made sense to provide more experiences for those wanting to drive a car, especially since wait times were very high for this attraction. With the demise of the Mickey Mouse Club Circus, which was in this upper area toward It's a Small World, a new junior Autopia was created in 1956 in this area. Then, in 1957, a midget Autopia was created just above Storybook Land canal boats on the way to Fantasyland train station. In 1959, the junior Autopia was redesigned as the Fantasyland Autopia. Needless to say, there were lots of cars on the road at Disneyland. Oh, and there was also a motorboat cruise that opened in 1957. All of these were adding park capacity. But were they creating a true Disneyland experience or just adding to more chaos and carnival-like atmosphere? When Disneyland opened, a man named Van France worked along with Dick Nunis, who later would eventually head all Disney parks worldwide. Well, they created the original orientation for new cast members, and they called it We Create Happiness. And they were in charge of welcoming and getting everybody on board to what this Disneyland thing was all about. Van left Disneyland organization a few years later, but then came back about 10 years after Disneyland's opening, this time actually reporting to Dick Nunis, whom he had originally hired himself years earlier. As Van Nunis walked through the park, now 10 years old, he came to realize that there was a definite reality gap between the romance preached at the Disney University and what was really actually happening out in the trenches. A new hire's first few days were filled with excitement about working at Disneyland, about being part of the show as a cast member, and about the importance of really creating happiness. Reality would then sink in. Typically, a foreman would say, "Hey, welcome to the real world." Different terms would describe the working realities of the job. One cast member assigned to cars in the Autopias would hear somebody say, "Welcome to Blood Alley," in reference to the demands of working with engine smoke and the possibilities back then in the early days of being ran over by youngsters driving cars. Clearly, everyone needed to be on the same page, and the mission needed to extend past the orientation. It was one thing to say we create happiness, but how do we make that happen operationally? One of those initiatives was the development of a program that would introduce theme park operations to the concept of 4 values: safety, courtesy, show, and capacity. Later, capacity was changed to efficiency, and then in the early 2020s, the word inclusion was added. Today, the way Disney creates happiness for its guests is by working through its 5 operational values of safety, courtesy, inclusion, show, and efficiency. Honestly, with relatively few changes, these have lasted the better part of 60 years and have inspired other organizations to establish their own operational standards. Simple service standards can be powerful tools in any organization, and there is power in establishing a framework of values from which everyone operates. I personally have had the opportunity from Singapore to South Africa, from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles, of working with organizations in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, helping them establish their own operational values and to implement those in order to create the best customer experience possible. It's within that framework you can empower employees in a way that gives them a sense of ownership and purpose. You can create a consistent image across the entire organization, whether you're talking about the operation or at Fantasyland, Autopia, or across all Autopia attractions or across all attractions, restaurants, and gift shops throughout the park. Disney standards have stood the test of time, and you can create standards within your own organization that will stand the test of time as well. Well, those attractions sit somewhat in the shadow of the mighty Matterhorn Mountain, which premiered on June 14th, 1959, along with the Disneyland submarines, and the Disneyland all-wag monorail. Originally, the Matterhorn bobsleds were part of Tomorrowland, and thus part of that big second opening the park had at that time. But in the 1970s, it was moved on the map to Fantasyland. The Matterhorn Mountain is based on the film Third Man on the Mountain, which starred James MacArthur and Janet Munro, who both went on to star in Swiss Family Robinson. Like Sleeping Beauty Castle, built several years before the film ever came out, Third Man on the Mountain as a film was released later on November 10th of that same year the Matterhorn opened. Ken Anakin, who directed both Third Man on the Mountain and Swiss Family Robinson, said that Third Man was Walt Disney's favorite live-action film. Walt Disney himself went to Europe to supervise production on the film. At one point, Walt grabbed a postcard of the mountain from a souvenir stand and sent it back to Imagineer and architect Vic Green with the message, "Vic, build this, Walt." The coaster in the Matterhorn is built of tubular steel, the first roller coaster to do so. Bob Gurr, Imagineer, spoke of steel as a faster solution than building a wooden roller coaster. And steel they used, about 500 tons of structural steel, none exactly the same size. The mountain towers at 145 feet high, but it appears much taller, even than Cinderella Castle at Magic Kingdom, which is 189 feet high. At the base of the mountain, you see a Yeti footprint. Long before there was a Yeti at Expedition Everest, there was an abominable snowman on Matterhorn Mountain. But there are some things that take more courage than facing a Yeti. Let's take a look at an event that happened 60 years ago this year. While it looks like winter on Matterhorn Mountain year-round, there's no time of year more beautiful than the holiday season at Disneyland. For years, these decorations have graced Disneyland, and at one time, a large revolving star stood on top of the Matterhorn. It even lit up and rotated. Unfortunately for Disney's cast members, the month of December has not always been happy. It was during one of these holiday seasons when the cast learned that Walt Disney had passed away very unexpectedly. In their shock, several managers sought refuge across the way at a lounge located at the Disneyland Hotel. There they shared their remembrances and drinks for several hours. As they got ready to leave, one member of management turned to the other and mentioned that the star on the top of the Matterhorn had again broken down. The other manager shrugged it off as if to say, "Why bother?" At that point, his colleague turned to him and exclaimed, "You wouldn't shrug it off if Walt was here." A few years later, the star was removed, but the conversation marked the beginning of a dialogue that has continued to this day, with cast members asking, "What would Walt do?" That philosophy carried the organization forward for many years, partly out of loyalty, partly out of habit. Still, one of Walt's most tenured animators, Ward Kimball, who drew Jiminy Cricket, noted that if you were instinctively in tune, you wouldn't have to ask the question. He himself had learned excellence intuitively. Moreover, he learned that excellence was not in repeating oneself or in going back in time to consider what others would do, but in moving forward and bringing new ideas to the table. After all, Ward reasoned, that is just exactly what Walt would have done. In truth and in time, those who loved Walt did exactly what Walt would have done. They kept moving forward because, according to the showman of the world, quote, "Around here, we don't look backwards for very long. We keep moving forward, opening up new doors and doing new things because we're curious and curiosity keeps leading us down new paths." And so while there is no Christmas star above the top of the Matterhorn Mountain, the idea, keep moving forward, has been the guiding star for Disneyland for more than 70 years. perhaps the one you wish upon to make your dreams come true. Well, that concludes our 70th anniversary of the lands at Disneyland. But it doesn't conclude our 70th anniversary series of this resort. Next, we cover the lands of Disney California Adventure, where we're going to find some truly amazing details and experiences just like here at Disneyland Park. For over a year, I've been capturing stories like the kind you've heard today and creating a new online tool for you to explore all of them in one place. I'm excited to share them with you and hope to have released them with this podcast. But like Walt told Claude Coates when Pirates of the Caribbean was being built, don't open it until it's ready. The good news is we're almost ready. But what is it? It's not a new book, although if you're looking for a book, I certainly have my Disney Leadership, U-Book, The Wonderful World of Customer Service book, and more. You can find those links on our show notes page. But this is something very different. It's more a multimedia presentation of the park, a sort of central media repository for photos, audio, videos, stories, maps, links, and more. Also, unlike a book which has to wait for the next version to come out, it can be updated in minutes and, better yet, be in the hands of users at the same time. Like Walt Disney talked about, a park that would keep growing. This resource will do the same thing and allow the user to benefit from more and new stories that will come out and will add more media and more photos and more videos. Whether you're on a comfy sofa looking at it at home or on Main Street USA looking at it with your mobile device, this experience will allow you to navigate through all 9 lands to explore some 100 locations where you can find Disney insights that will inspire and guide you and your organization. I'll share more shortly, but get ready. You will not be able to find a multimedia experience as rich and as in-depth as this one. This is something very new, very unique, and very Disney. Thanks for joining us for this podcast. Know that as in the title of my organization, Performance Journeys, it is as much about the journey as it is about the performance. Find the second star to the right and keep going straight on until you reach it. Follow the compass of your heart and know that with a smile and a song, a little faith, effort, and pixie dust, your dreams can come true. After all, if we can dream it, we can do it. Until next time, bright suns, we'll see ya real soon.